What's up, guys? It's your boy, me. I'm just going to show you how to do this little mirror thingy effect that we did in post. It's a simple effect, and you can do it in camera practically, but you get a little more control over it in post. On top of that, we were going to do like a little mirror reveal and an initial crack, and instead of trying to cram that little trick into the production day, we just decided it'd probably be easier to do in post. So, open up Blender. There's going to be kind of like three sections of this. One will be the material, the other will be the mirror physics, and then we'll get into like the final product and lighting and all that. So you can see we have two lights. Technically we had three, but as far as the mirror is concerned, we'll probably only use two. So I've got a key light over here that's giving her lots of light on her face, and then one that's positioned behind her. That one will be that kind of opaque blue. So first thing we'll do is get our perspective here. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything. Just going to click delete all. And let's pretend that she's sitting somewhere in this square. So the first thing I'm going to do is scale this up to be somewhere that's not the smallest default size. And then I'll start adding in where my camera should be. So I'm just going to add a camera. It appeared under here. A little trick to get that camera up is just press Control Alt 0. Let's just say our mirror, and this is just to get an idea of where we are, but I'm going to bring this up. I'm going to rotate it along the y-axis 90 degrees, and I'm going to put it over here, which would mean the camera should be right here somewhere. She would be, let's just pretend she's this monkey. I'm going to put this little monkey in the mirror. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and that is somewhat similar to the position that we shot this thing in. So the second thing you could do is set up lighting, but because that'll take a bit to refine, and we kind of already know where the lights are going to go, I'm going to just show you how to break this thing into a cracked mirror. I'm sure there's lots of ways to do this. This is the way that I thought would be easiest. I watched some tutorials on cell fracturing and all that, and it just seemed like this made the most sense. Plenty of stuff you could do with cell fracturing. This is probably the most basic one. So the first thing is, even though this is the mirror we made, it's mostly just for scale and for position. I'm going to create a new plane. And I'm going to bring it slightly above the big plane we just made for the ground. Maybe split the difference there, somewhere like here. You can see it's just barely off the ground. And then I'd go into modifiers, and I'm going to add a solidify just to give it a little bit of thickness. You can see that here. It's probably too thick. I'm going to go 0.005 just so it's a tiny little sliver of thickness. I'm going to apply that. And then I can scale it up. I'm just going to go ahead and apply the scale. And now what I'll do is now I have to fracture it. So let me hide my monkey. So I'm going to go into preferences, add-ons, and just search cell fracture. You'll see it here. It comes with Blender. It is enabled, so I actually don't know. I think that's in... Yeah, it's in Quick Effects, but I don't really care. I just press F3 and just search cell fracture, or you can search anything you want in there technically. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of use the annotation pencil to draw on top of my plane that I want to fracture. So if you want to learn more about this, you're more than welcome to go watch some tutorials on how to use the cell fracture, but I'm just kind of going to speed through this. So I want I want to choose from multiple pieces or different designs of the fracture in the mirror. So I think probably the easiest thing to do would be to go dense and then get wider as we go, so that the tinier cracks are in the center and they get larger as we go out. So I'm just gonna draw like a couple things in here, maybe a little circle, maybe a big one. You don't have to be like really tedious with this. You just kind of play with it and see what that does for you. The reason I'm in orthographic mode is because I can draw right on top of this since it's facing directly up. If you have it positioned at an angle, you can switch your pen to stick to surfaces. So you notice here, my pen um, wouldn't stick to a surface unless I could do this, and it really wouldn't stick to a surface unless I switched it to surface mode. And now if I paint it, you can see that it's anchored onto that surface there. Either way, go up to top mode if you want, or switch it to surface, and then just draw out what you want. Now that I've got it, I'm going to press F3 with my object that I'm fracturing selected, so that plane is selected. I'm going to go to annotation pencil, which is where we're the point source. We're telling it to fracture by the annotation pencil, and this is something you'll just have to experiment with. I think I used 200. I don't actually know, so we're gonna guess. I'm gonna give it 0.25 noise. I think that's what I used. Again, this isn't exactly what I did, but this will get you there. You could play with all this stuff. I don't really know what any of these do, to be honest. I know that these have to do with like smaller particles, which we're not too complex here. So I don't need any tiny, tiny, tiny particles. I just need various sizes. So I'll press OK, and it's gonna kind of generate a bunch of pieces here. With all of those selected, I'm going to press M and move them into a new group. I'm just going to call this fractures. Well, that's not how you spell that, but I don't care. I'm going to close out of the grease pencil. Actually, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to View, Annotations, and just delete the grease pencil there. You'll see it's doing this kind of like weird like normals thing where you can kind of see through something. I don't want that. That's because it created these fractures while leaving our existing plane. So you can see our plane is here. So I'm going to actually move this into a new group in case we need it. I'm going to call this plane for fracture. And then I'm just going to turn that off. So let me collapse that and go here. So you can see now, this isn't probably the best looking fracture, but if you play around with that annotation pencil, you'll be able to get some cool results. Just mess with the settings, and as long as you keep that pretty, the pencil marks pretty thin, then you'll be able to kind of speed through this process. If you make a ton of marks, it'll take longer. It took me probably 10 seconds. So I'm just going to leave this for now. This is good enough for our purposes. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these particles here, or the fractures. I'm going to select objects. You see we have a yellow one in the center there. I'm going to go to Object, and I'm going to Rigid Body, and I'm going to add an active. And that should add it to all the selected objects, I believe. And we can verify that by going into our physics properties. Yeah, so as I select each object, you can see that none of these change. Then I'm going to select this plane at the bottom and change this to a passive rigid body, which will cause it to stand still. And I'm going to just press play, and it'll drop, kind of simulate these, and you'll notice some of them fall to the bottom, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go to scene settings, and I'm going to go to rigid body world, and I'm going to put something in here that's higher than 10. That just increases kind of the calculations done by Blender, which is good for close-ups and things that you might need like more detailed collisions with. You can see it didn't really do a good job there, so I'm going to turn this up as well. And now it's really taken a while bogging down. So I'm actually going to split this to 20 and see if that still gets us where we need. Yeah, plenty. Might even come down more. 15. There we go. Particles are starting to fall through, so I'm going to go back to 20. You notice we drop it, and we might have lost some tiny bits there, but I'm not too concerned about those. You'll notice though that these shapes kind of fall around on each other and then they continue to bounce. Um, we're not too concerned. Normally that would be a problem for us, but we're not too concerned about where these pieces stop moving as much as we are about the position they fall onto the ground. So it looks a little up to me. So I'm actually going to go take this plane and I'm going to subdivide it. I'm just going to do 100 times. It probably isn't necessary, but I'm going to do it anyway. Then I'm going to go to displace, and I'm just going to put a very gentle, well, that's not gentle, but it will be. I'm going to put a very gentle displace on this. So maybe 0.01. There we go. It's looking like it's doing something there. And I'm going to apply this. Whoops. I'm going to apply this and try it again. And the reason I'm doing that is because you'll notice that these sit pretty flat when they hit the ground. And I kind of want them to have a little bit of maybe movement to it, or like uneven edges. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to turn the strength up just a little bit. I'm going to apply that and watch it drop again. So now it's doing weird stuff. And I would just play around with this. Sometimes it's not necessary. Maybe you just drop it from a certain height. And you can obviously play around with simulation settings as much as you want. I was just trying to get something done quickly for this project. Since it's so close up, it doesn't have to look amazing. So I'm going to change this to go a little lower. So we're basically on the ground. Yeah, so that looks kind of cool to me. Let me try lifting it up, see what that does for us. Okay, so now we're getting some overlapping, some interesting things happening here. This is cool, like all these little pieces are kind of forming what we need. All right, so now let's talk about the texture. I'm actually going to apply this rigid body. So now that we've got these pieces where we want them, I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to go to rigid body, and I'm going to apply transformation. And then I'm going to press F3, and I'm going to search remove rigid body. Let's double check that worked. Yep, so nothing has any sort of physics on it except for this bottom ground plane. We can remove that. Since it's already sitting there, we don't need it. And now we can start working with textures. Let me show you how a mirror texture is created in Blender. Super simple. I'm going to remove fractures for now, and we're just going to build the mirror on top of this plane. Or the material, sorry. So here is the default Blender material. I'm going to press new. I'm in the shading tab. I'm going to press new. It's going to give me a principled BSDF, which you could use to make a mirror, and it would be very clean and crispy, but you're going to turn roughness all the way down. You can see you're starting to get some reflection. And then I'm going to turn metallic all the way up. And immediately it just becomes a beautiful clean mirror. You can see there's pretty much no difference in this versus any of the reflections in real time, which means you don't have any imperfections here, right? So we want to add something for realism, because this is just simply too clean. And you could play with the roughness and make it, something, but it's not exactly what we want. So I like to add realistic textures from images is typically how you do it. You could do it procedurally, and that wouldn't be too tough. But for the sake of this, it's probably most efficient to use textures. So I use this website. It's not a texture site, but I use this website called Pexels. And this just gives you like free high-res royalty images. So I searched smudges, I think, in here. Maybe fingerprints, but you just kind of look through and find things that you would see in a dirty mirror. So if I go here and just search a reference image of dirty mirrors, you can see there's all kinds of little dots as well as long smudge lines from some other texture. So here's a good reference here. These are kind of the shapes we're looking for. They don't have to be exact because we're going to be so close. But I'm going to go in here and even though this is a colored image, this could be useful just because it has the shapes. You could convert that into black and white, which I will show you how to do in Blender and use that. You could take this. This is a good one. Looks like a paper texture. I'm going to search fingerprints, see if they have anything there. Not really. Let's just search dirty. This is great. Even this could be good. You want something that has a lot of little details. I'm just going to search grunge. And I think this will probably be best for us. I'm going to choose this one. I'm going to download this, the original. Maybe this might be a good one. And again, I'm looking for high quality, no perspective warp, details that I can refine. This is a good one. And just for the hell of it, let's just search dirty mirror. Sometimes you luck out and you find something that's perfect, and sometimes you gotta kind of make it yourself. This would be perfect if it wasn't a perspective. You see this image, you've got depth of field. This isn't great. If you were to crop it right here, maybe you could do something with it, but even then you're looking at an angle. So those are the images you want to try to avoid. Cool. I think this is enough. Let's go back. I'm going to enable Node Wrangler. If you don't have that, you should. Node Wrangler. There we go. Enabled. Click on your BSDF and then Command T or Control T if you're on Windows. And I'm going to try this one first. And if we Control Shift T or Control Shift click, it'll give us a preview of what we're looking at here. So in order to kind of define these details, I'm going to first make this a little bit larger, maybe 1.6. You'll see it's starting to tile. So let's just try one first. Then I'm going to do a color ramp, which converts everything into black and white. And you'll see once I enable this, now it's in black and white. We don't want all of these details, so I'm going to just slide this black up until we have just a very small amount. And maybe bring this down. And we're just looking for small details. And sometimes these images don't really work that well. So here we go. We're getting a little bit of what looks like dirt. So I'm going to keep this section. This is looking nice. And now you'll notice since I've eliminated this, I can probably put this back to 1.6. And yeah, you can see less obviously that it's tiling. All right, so what do I do with this? I've got these like small little black dirty specks that I have refined, but what am I supposed to do with that? Let's put these into the roughness value. So in Blender, white and black are values of 1 being white and 0 being black. Which means since roughness can only go from 0 to 1, any value of white will be 1, any value of black will be 0, and anything in between will be between 1 and 0. I'm going to plug this in here and you'll see what it does. Make sure we get that. So because most of our image was white from the color ramp, it turned roughness up to 1 for the entire image and turned roughness to 0 for the small black specks that we had. You can see that here, and you can also see as I slide this, you'll get more black specks. They turn gray, but you'll get more black specks as I slide this backwards. So we need to reverse this, the black and white. You can do that two ways. The easiest way to keep it straight for me is just a invert node. So just search invert, plug that in here, and now you have a mirror with some dirt on it. This probably isn't enough. We have just one type of smudge, which is fine. If you want to stop there, you can. You can play around with these values, squeeze these in, make them small, make them super not noticeable, whatever you want to do. You could blow the whole thing out and make only certain parts smooth. But for a realistic mirror, I'm thinking we need another image texture. So I'm going to go ahead and import. I'm going to click on this again, and I'm going to put Command T, and it's going to bring me this. It's automatically going to plug it into the base color, so I'm going to remove that. I'm going to open another image and see if one of these other ones works. Let's try our rust color. So here's our color. This looks kind of nice. I'm going to put a color ramp on this. And I'm just going to squeeze this in. Yeah, this is looking cool. Let me change the size again to somewhere around 1.6. And then I'm going to stretch this along this scale. Yeah, I think that's looking better. Okay. So let's hone in on this dirt. Yeah, I'm looking for some of these irregular, natural, like water damage patterns. I'd like these to be as small as possible, but still seeing what's going on here. And keep in mind, we're not looking at the mirror from this perspective. We'll never see the whole mirror. We're very close up. So this may take, a couple tries to get right, but once you get these details down, then all you have to do is play with the size and the distribution. So I'm going to probably do something like this. Yeah, that looks good. And I'm going to jump this up to 2.3, maybe even more, maybe 3. And I'm going to play with these values here. Yeah, put this back to 0. Put this back to 3. I'm trying to find the right value. Yeah, there we go. The X value is what I wanted. I'm just going to stretch that out. If you remember, the original photo for that was not a square. So I'm trying to keep it from distorting too much. Okay, here's our mirror texture. Plug this into your roughness. It'll replace what was there. We'll show you how to mix those. But this is actually looking pretty good. You can see we've got some irregular patterns. Now, most likely, these wouldn't be a completely rough surface, even if it was a damaged mirror. You'll be able to see through those. So to fix that, you just have to turn this down from white. So I'm going to take this white slider and just jump this down to maybe somewhere in here. So it's just a gray. Remember, it's a value of 1 or 0. So now you're looking, yeah, it's a little bit reflective, but you can see that it's not entirely reflective. Now to mix these. So I'm going to slide this out. We're going to add another node in here. Go to Mix RGB, and this took me a while to figure out the difference. That might be kind of embarrassing, but I didn't know that Mix RGB was only for just call it pixel-based things, right? There's vector and there's raster. Vector is a bit of a more math-oriented calculation versus pixels, which are primarily just color. And this we mix these two together with an RGB mix, and not the mix shader. The mix shader mixes two shaders like this one together. So we will use that quite often, but probably not in this tutorial. The mix RGB will go right into the roughness, and if we want to preview at any point what this is doing, you just Control Shift that node and it'll hook it up to the viewer node. So here you're getting a mix. If you slide this factor, you'll get one texture over the other. I'm going to put this back to 0.5, and I'm going to switch this mix to add. Where is that? Here it is. It doesn't do a whole lot until you slide this slider all the way up, and you'll see that it's actually just adding this second texture, this bottom value, into the mix a little bit brighter than if the value's down. And that's just the difference between mix and add. You'll just get one or the other. You go here, or you get a blend. And I want both of them to be as strong as the other. So I'm going to put that in here. I'm going to Control Shift my principled BSDF, and we should see both textures combined in here. And I'm thinking this is looking pretty good. You can do this as many times as you want. If you want to add another image, it's pretty easy. You're just going to add an image texture, Control T, and you don't need, if you had a bunch of images that were all the same size, you would get rid of all of these and just use one mapping setup. So you would use one of these and you would plug this into here, yada yada. But we have different sized images, so we're kind of using these separately. So if I wanted to add another image, I could go back to my downloads and I could add, I think it was this one. Control Shift. We're looking at something kind of whack. I don't know if this is going to work so well, but let's just try it. I'm going to put this up to maybe 3. So now you can kind of see some small details. Once we add that color ramp on there, we should be good. I'm going to type in color ramp, put it in here, make sure we can see that, and then I'm just going to drag this slider in until we start to see some detail. And again, I don't know that this is going to work, but we're going to try. So you could keep it somewhere in here, and you see these little specks of black color. We could put an invert node on that, and now you have something. I'm actually going to slide this down now that the invert node is on it, and now we have tiny little specks. I don't know if this is super realistic, but we're going to keep it just for the sake of that. So how do you mix 3 nodes? Same process. I'm going to Shift D on this. It's going to duplicate it. I'm going to plug it right here. I'm going to press add. It's already on add because I duplicated it. Then I'm going to take the color and put it in here. Then I'm going to take the color of this and put it into the roughness. So now we should have all 3 images on here. And you can test that out just by, I think you can just disable. If you press M, well, that's maybe not the best thing, but you could test these out if you wanted to make sure they're all there just by playing around with the individual color ramps. Yeah, you can see things are starting to disappear there. I'm going to undo all that, and I think we're good. So now to apply these onto our fractures. I'm going to enable fractures here. I'm just going to select one of these, and maybe I just do the top one in the list. But I'm going to, well, first let's click on our mirror texture and just rename this. Okay, now I'm going to click on this one. We're going to click this little drop down menu, and you'll see mirror with smudges right there. As soon as you turn it on, it only affects this one, but you can see in here we're looking good. The size of these these pieces or these small chunks of like irregular roughness are the same size as they are on this mirror, which is good because we don't want this entire texture to fit inside this tiny little piece of mirror. So we'll keep this. We got to apply these to the other textures here. How do we do that? I'm actually gonna, well, I did the wrong thing. All right. So in order to do that, I'm going to right click here, select all of our fractures, and you'll see this one that we had already selected remains yellow and the rest of these are orange. That's good. All that means is the thing that you last selected will be yellow. Only one can be yellow. The rest will be orange. And that tells you when you press Control L, you are linking materials to the orange highlighted material. So whatever's on that orange highlighted selection will apply to the other orange, sorry, the yellow highlighted selection will apply to the orange selection. So I'm going to select link materials and boom, we've got ourselves a mirror. This looks a little, it's a little hard to see in this mode. So let's set up a camera. I'm actually going to go back to layout view now that we finished our texture. I'm going to set up my camera here. The camera right now is at this perspective, so that means I need to shift my plane. So I'm going to take this, select all, and hold down shift and select your ground plane. I'm going to rotate them along the y-axis 90 degrees, and then I'm going to scoot them back along the x-axis. Actually, let's just scoot the camera. I'm going to grab this stuff. I'm going to scoot the camera. I'm going to get rid of this. And now let's look at what our camera's looking at. Once I'm in my camera and it's selected, I can just press G and I can move it wherever I'd like. And should be able to, yeah. I'm going to go back to object mode, select my camera, make sure depth of field is on. I'm going to turn the aperture down to what we were using on the day, which I believe was 2.2. And I'm going to make sure this is a 55 millimeter. Those are the lens specs of what we were using. Now, calculating for your sensor size and all that is something that you may need to do. For example, if this is a Super 35 sensor, then you would have to do the calculations to make sure that a 50 millimeter, I believe that would be around like 65 millimeters if I'm not wrong, but you would have to do the calculations just to make sure you're consistent. If you try to add something to regular footage and you use the wrong focal length, it'll look all messed up and you don't really know why. Yeah, that's something you'll probably have to experiment with, but just try to do the right calculations before you get too deep into your project. Now that we've got that, I'm going to add a image as a plane so we can see what we're breaking up here. You're going to go down to add, Shift A, add image as plane. For the sake of this, I'm going to give you the little sample of the video that we did. I'm going to give you a clip that's not colored, so it's not super satisfying to look at, but it'll be better than nothing. So I'm going to drag this in here, and right away it's putting it where we don't want. I'm going to press GX, move it backwards. Remember, she was behind camera, so camera's over here, she's right here. I'm going to open a new window, just drag into this corner, and let's press 0 for camera. I'm not really liking how we can see the whole thing, so I'm just going to go down here and press render region. Also make sure your frame rate's right. If you shot it in 24, make sure this is in 23.98. This really isn't important until you start doing animation, but before you do anything, make sure you're in the right frame here. That also goes with your resolution. So if you had an anamorphic lens on, you want to make sure you dump it out in anamorphic. So right off the bat, our image is too small. So I'm going to bring this up to about there, and then let's see. This camera probably wasn't at this sharp of an angle, so I'm going to move it to something here, and then just move it over. Cool. So fractures I think are too big, which we're not too far to make new fractures. You can see this, put this in here. I'm going to move this to a new collection. Images. Select fractures. They should be smaller. You could redo this simulation. It wouldn't take too long now that you know how to do it. And if this were my final project, I would be redoing this simulation just because I want these particles to be very convincing, right? And this looks a little too geometric versus glass shatter. So I would, but I'm going to keep going. You guys can experiment with that on your own. Let's see. I want the camera to be much closer to these specs now that we've made them pretty small. And we can even keep bringing these down. So what I'm looking for here is complete unrecognizable blur of these things, right? I don't want anything to be too obvious that it's fractured unorganically. This is starting to look good, and I think we're just in an ugly frame here. So to move this, I'm going to set up an empty that's down here, empty plane axis, and I'm just going to move this out so I can see it. But I'm going to select the empty, select the mesh, make sure the empty is in yellow and the mesh of the camera is in orange, and I'm going to press Control P, parent, object, keep transform, and now when I move the empty, it'll move the camera, but it will also allow us to animate the camera with camera movement so that you don't have to restart every time. You just drag the empty where you want, you add the camera movement, and you're done. This frame is a little too large now, so I'm going to shrink this just a little above your field of view here. And you'll see this is pointing into the background, right? And the background is darker than the background here because we shot this thing in log. So I'm going to get rid of our world setting, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to press remove, and now we get this color here. So let me go. One more thing I forgot. When you bring this in, I'm going to do this again. When you bring this in, make sure you press emit. That was my fault. I did not press emit. I did images as backgrounds and I selected principled. It's not what you want. Select your video file and make sure it's on emit, strength of 1. All of these settings are fine. Import images as planes. Now we're good. Move this back, jump this up, probably here. I'm going to lift it. Okay, and you notice now our background is gray, which corresponds with this color. So all I really want to do, and you could get pretty in depth about this. If you shot a 360 photo, this would be the time to use it. If you shot a black background, this would be the time to use it, but I didn't. It's pretty much dark, and by the time we get to color, it should be fine. But you would click on this, you could do this, and then select something of that color if you wanted to pull the image out and do that from there. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to try to roughly match it because it is a mirror after all, and it doesn't really matter exactly where it's pointed. I can see this one here is going to cause us some problems. So just because it's on such of an angle, it's given us all kinds of darkness. So I'm going to double tap R and just shift it to somewhere that's roughly in the same place. And you can do that for all these. You can manually move them. You can spin them around. And keep in mind, you do have a mirror underneath your fractures, which will cover any of the spots that would otherwise be dark. If I press hide on this, you can immediately see we're getting some bad results. So that's why we did two mirror textures on top of each other. The other thing that you can't see right now is where are your imperfections? Can't see them. Let's work on that. Right now we have no lights in our scene. That's okay. I'm going to add them. We're going to start with just emission planes. I used I think it was an S60 sky panel and a 300D with color gels, I think. And it was either way, it was very soft sources. So you don't want anything in here too harsh. So I'm going to create two planes. Plane here and a plane there. I'm going to shift D duplicate. One of these planes will be this color and the other one will be this. So I actually shot this thing the other way around. The easiest way to fix that would just be to rotate Z 180. And now she's on this side. So let me find a flattering perspective for her. I'm going to select my empty and select my image so they move together, and I'm going to press G and then I'm going to press Shift X, which will eliminate the forward backward movement on the X plane. That means we don't get any closer to the mirror than we already are. So I'm going to move these around, find a cool spot. Somewhere here could be cool. Maybe. Yeah, and this is, let me move these. This is something that you can spend however long you want refining. I'm just going to try to pick a piece just so we have kind of a good frame to start with. You don't want to distort her face too bad. So something up here might be good, and then we'll just manually move some of these. So I've got this big one, which we probably don't want to touch or she's going to start looking wonky. This one could be good. Just going to shift this one somewhere to her eye. Turn off overlays here so we can see what we're doing. You can take this here and just kind of rotate it to show something else. You could take this and just trying to play. You know, we don't want anything to be too predictable. You don't want to overdo it either. But again, this is the part of the creative process. So let's just take this. This is real dramatic, and I wouldn't probably use this, but it's good enough. Let's set up our lighting. So over here, if we go into render view, you can see this side is blue, this side is orange. So I need to create a blue emission from here. So I'm going to press new. I'm going to go here, and you could do this in the shader panel, or you could just keep it simple. I'm going to press emission, and I'm going to take the color and make it somewhere in that vein. Sometimes this color picker doesn't work so well, so I like to just kind of play around with it myself. But what we're looking for here, so let me back this out. What we're looking for here is light on our mirror. We're not looking to light our subject. We've already done that. I'm trying to find light on our mirror. So let me move this up. This is a pretty large source, so you can see it start to come in here. Just going to move that out a bit and put that here. Maybe shrink it slightly. And now I'll turn the strength up. You want to make sure that your levels are still okay. If we're looking directly at that light in a mirror, you're going to start to blow out color. You can see, let me turn the saturation up just so you can get a feel for what I'm talking about. So here, once we start getting too high up, you start to get less of this cool kind of like fall off, right? Um, so I'm gonna give it maybe about, that looks good, maybe around 15 to 20. Let me try 20. Yeah, let's keep that. This is way too saturated, so I'm going to turn it down to something in this vein. And remember, when we put a color grade on it, they should kind of be on the same palette, because you don't want something to be too saturated and then it doesn't match, right? So we want to try to match this with the color tone and then take saturation down to what it is here. So this one is our yellow light. I'm going to put it over here and make sure that we're rotating it towards the mirror. And that's the most important light, right? The key light. So we figured that one out first. Here we are. Now it's bouncing on this side. This is good. I'm going to take this plane and put it over here, GX and GZ, lift it up, and then I'm just going to rotate it so it's facing the mirror. It's probably a little high. Remember, the lights you put here need to be pretty much identical to the setup that you had on the day you shot footage. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to select emission, and I'm going to change it to this kind of opaque blue. Let me turn this up to 50 just so we can see it, just to make sure these colors are getting along here. Take a little bit of saturation out of it. Something like that. I'm going to put this down to 25, and to 20, and we're looking pretty consistent. Cool. So with that, you can move this light wherever you want. You're not necessarily locked down with the hair light because it's not really doing much other than adding texture to the mirror. But if you look closely, you can see we're getting these kind of like cool smudges. When we're that close, it looks realistic and blurred, right? So let me turn my viewport noise threshold down. But yeah, you're starting to see some pretty little bokeh here, something that you would really only find in a dirty mirror. If you didn't have this, it would look very boring. So that's why materials are so important, even for things where you're not even getting detail. But to me, this looks pretty good. The biggest thing with this that I found is your light bounces. This is a little bit complex. There's lots of reading you can do on this and what all these do, but essentially this is how many calculations the Blender does for each specific type of light bounce. So there's glossy, which is what we're working with. That's basically dealing in reflections. So you'll notice if I take this down to 1 or even 0, you're getting none of these second bounces. So you're getting the directional 1 bounce of glossy, but you're not getting any of these lights coming in a frame, right? If I turn this up to 100, you're getting all of those, and you'll get a couple more that you're not noticing if it's at 4. These are very small details, but they will make a difference. So I would encourage you to crank this up. Sorry, that's your diffuse. Put that back down. Crank this up to 100, and you will see better results in your final output. It will take longer to render, but it's very unnoticeable. Transmission is being able to see through an object. We're not seeing through anything, so I'm actually going to turn this to 1, and this will save our render times. Diffuse, that's simply the base color and the textures that we made. I'm going to keep that at 4. And I'm going to turn this up to 50 for total bounces. I'm going to take our transparent, I'm going to put that at 1. We don't need that. We don't have any volume. That can remain at 1. And then if you don't, make sure your caustics are enabled. That specifically refers to glass and reflections. So the way that light kind of passes through objects is caustics. So make sure you have those on reflective and refractive. That should come stock in Blender with those on. But yeah, here is your scene. This is a very simple setup, and if you want to kind of figure out what it looks like with a little more contrast on it, you could go down to color management and just select standard, and you could do a very high contrast look. Kind of gives you a feel of like where your levels are at. And you can see that we're a little hot here in these. So this is a good thing to check before you do final output. But all that means is that you just take the material and turn it down a bit. So maybe try 10 and you're getting a lot less blowout. But even naturally, blowout occurs in film. It's not necessarily a good thing unless you're looking for it. But I would just play around with these values until you get something you like. Once you're done, make sure you take this view transform off. Go back to Filmic and go back to no look, and that'll give you kind of your base contrast here. If you don't do that, it'll be harder to grade. It might still look good if you liked it coming out of Blender, great. If you wanted to grade it, make sure it's in Filmic. Cool. Camera settings, we're not going to go too much into those, but you can play around with camera movement. For a natural camera move, I used something called noise modifiers. So that just means I select my camera and I press I for insert keyframe, and I'm just going to do location and rotation, right? Then I go up to graph editor, and you can see it gave me these flat lines because there's only one keyframe. But if I click on one and I press N, it'll pull up my little modifiers menu here, and I can add noise. So this noise, you can see it happening here, is camera bouncing from one perspective to the other. So X is actually the one I don't want any of that on, so I'm actually not going to do that. Y, let's just try rotation. I could do Y rotation, add modifier noise, and you can see it's twisting and bouncing all around. That's way too much. So you can take your scale and you can reduce that, reduce the strength. I normalized it, so now you can't really tell, but you can look at your camera here and just see what it's doing. So it's kind of twisting. I'm going to pull that scale in just to give us kind of a handheld move. Put that strength to maybe 0.09. Just see what it's doing. Okay, and that's not bad. I don't know. It's your preference on how much handheld camera shake in there. There's always add-ons too for this stuff, and that's one that I would try to get is Quake Camera Motion. It basically makes it so you don't have to do all of this every time. You just kind of you press the button and it works, which is a huge time saver. But if you want to know how it works, this is how it works. They put all these modifiers in here for you. And you can see we're starting to get some like natural camera sway. And then you can add irregularities or whatever you want. I'm going to just show you how Quake Camera Motion works real quick. I've got it right here. I click on my camera. I'm going to delete any keyframes that I had, any markers I had. I think something's going on here. I don't really know. Cool. So here's our object transform. I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to click default little shake. That's the only one I really use, but you can see in here it is giving you the slightest amount of camera movement. And then from there you can control it. Remember, we have the empty. So if I want to move this up, it still keeps the camera moving, but I can move my empty wherever I want. The same with rotation. So if I want to rotate my camera here, it's pretty simple with the empty. But that's basically how it works. And then on output, just make sure you follow the same requirements for output as you do for normal video. I output this in EXR. I might do a little tutorial on that later, but PNG will work just fine for those of you that just want to plug it in. And then you drop it into After Effects or Premiere and just make sure the frame rate's correct. And then, yeah, you're done. The only thing that I would encourage you to do is keep this in Filmic just so you can color it. It is nice to know how the difference in color works between what you've shot in camera and what comes out of Blender color-wise, because it's done with math calculations versus trying to capture what's done in or what's shown to the sensor. There's all kinds of imperfections and dust and stuff that will contaminate your color, but when you come out of Blender, it is math calculations. So each of those colors are completely controllable and you can single them all out. Super interesting, so play around with it. Focus, we forgot to talk about focal on the camera, but select your camera, go to viewport display and just select limits, and that way you can see where your camera is focusing. You could do a math calculation to see the distance between the back of your lens and the mirror and this. I didn't do that. I just took it in here and I just made it as sharp as possible. So something like this, and that way you're not soft on all of your in Blender camera operator skills should be just as sharp as your native real world skills. So just make sure you're on top of that. A lot of people try to dump, and I did this too, but I exported an entire project thinking, it's done and I don't want to wait for it to render twice. But small things like a loss of focus in the middle of your video can cause you to have to render it all out again. So just do tests. Just make sure every once in a while you're hitting F12 and rendering something out just to make sure you like the way it looks. I would try to keep your render times as low as possible. I'm on a 3080 Ti, so it's pretty quick, but this shouldn't. You do not need to export this high. You can see I'm using 4,096 samples, and that's with Cycles X default. I don't need that, so I'm going to turn this down to probably when I'm doing early renders, I'll turn this down to 200, just because it'll take a lot less time. And we're done. So do that until your final render. And on your final render, I used 600 samples at 4K. It took about 30 seconds per frame. But before that, I was rendering out 2 or 3 versions of each scene at, I think, something like 250 samples. And I didn't bother doing 4K until the final render. You can use your denoise too to help compensate for low sampling just for a preview. But I wouldn't worry too much about trying to get those full res until you are in love with your early renders. Anyway, that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to know what you guys are going to make with this. If you decide to use it, feel free to send it to me. I'd love to see it. So, all right, peace.